We would now like to welcome Marcella White to the stage. She spent her first 20 years of life behind the Iron Curtain in socialist Romania under a brutal dictatorship. She credits her freedom to the bold words and actions of Ronald Reagan, which were the catalyst to their revolution in December of 1989. Let's welcome Marcella to the stage.
Is this a good one? Good. Okay. The name of this event is Liberty. Does it matter? I was born behind the Iron Curtain in a brutal, tyrannical socialism, so I can tell you it matters. It makes all the difference. It's the difference between expressing your own views and or getting imprisoned and killed for the expressing the views that you have and being against the government. The difference between keeping what you work for and all that being taken away from you. Socialistic policies had sucked the spirit out of the industrious people like my grandparents and my parents who worked so hard for their farms and for their businesses, and it was all stripped away from them. And the reason was redistribution. They said it was going to be all in the name of redistribution, security, and the greater good. However, a very small amount made it down to the people, because most of it was used to pad the lavish lifestyle of the government, of the Communist Party, and our dictator. We didn't have the freedom to make choices. Our choices were made for us. They were all decided for us. We had government education, government health care, government utilities. We didn't have free speech. We didn't have guns. We had tremendous debt, socialist media propaganda, and leadership that profits from it all. We had no liberty and no hope that we would ever live a different life. Not until we had heard a great man speaking words that were against our government, like, man cannot be free unless government is limited, or government is not the solution, government is the problem. We were so desperate for freedom, we were taking a chance of being imprisoned or killed just to listen to those words that were spoken on an outlawed radio station called Radio Free Europe. As you know, that was your president. So. That was your president, Ronald Reagan. He was speaking truth to power. He said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. I feel like those words rescued me. Those words eventually led to the end of the communist rule in Romania, and the borders opened up. I witnessed firsthand the goodness and generosity of the American people when military members gave up their vacation time and their money to come minister to our impoverished country. You don't know how blessed you are to live in a constitutional republic. We're giving our liberties away under the pretext of increasing our security. Our next speaker understands the value of the Constitution. He is a powerful example of the American dream. Born in Cuba, Rafael Cruz lived and suffered under the cruel, oppressive dictator. He began fighting Batista's regime as a teenager. He was imprisoned and tortured simply because he wanted to be free. Rafael arrived in Texas in 1957 on a student visa. He got a job as a dishwasher making 50 cents an hour. He worked his way through the University of Texas while learning English. Later on, he built a small business to further the pursuit of the American dream. In early 1980, Rafael Cruz joined the state board of the Religious Roundtable, a Judeo-Christian organization that mobilized millions of people of faith during the presidential campaign of Ronald Reagan. He's an ordained minister and the director of Grace for America, sharing the Word of God in churches and pastors' conferences throughout the United States. His son, Ted Cruz, is a constitutional conservative U.S. senator from Texas and candidate for the United States president in 2016. When Ted was a child growing up in Houston, Rafael would tell him, "When we faced oppression in Cuba, I had a place to flee to. If we lose our freedoms here, where do we go?" That's why Reverend Cruz is passionate about returning America to the scriptural, historical, and constitutional foundations that made this country exceptional. I met Rafael and heard him speak in Oklahoma this past summer and was ready to vote for him. I'm honored to introduce to you Pastor Rafael Cruz.
It's not about me, it's all about him.
Yeah.
To God be all the glory.
Amen.
Well, as you heard Marcella mentioning, I was born in Cuba, and the Batista regime was a very, very oppressive regime. Within the 7 years that he was a dictator, he killed more than 20,000 dissidents. And the revolution started in the high schools and the universities. I remember at that time there was this young, charismatic leader talking about hope and change. His name was Fidel Castro. And we all followed him. We thought he was going to be our liberator. Little did we know. Well, anyway, as a result of my involvement in the revolution, I was captured, was imprisoned, was tortured. But by the grace of God, that God that I did not know, but he knew me, I was able to leave Cuba legally on a student visa and come to the United States. 57, still thinking Castro was a good guy. 1959, Castro takes over, and at the end of that summer, I go back to Cuba. And did I ever get a shock? Because this same man that had been talking about hope and change was now talking about how the rich were evil, about how they oppressed the poor, and about the need to redistribute the wealth. He began confiscating private property, began attacking freedom of the press, began attacking freedom of religion. Let me give you an idea. Soldiers would come into a kindergarten class and would say to the kids, "All right, kids, close your eyes and pray to God for candy." Where's the candy? No candy. All right, close your eyes again and pray to Fidel for candy. And while the kids had their eyes closed, very quietly they would place candy on all the desks. You know, we are seeing a lot of religious persecution in America today. More specifically, we are seeing Christian persecution in America. But you need to realize that that is not the objective. That is only the means. You see, communism, socialism, Marxism, don't get caught up in the semantics. It's all the same. It requires that government become your God.
That's right.
And in order for government to become your God, they must destroy the concept of God. That's what's behind the attack of religion in America. By the way, you know that story that I told you about the kids in kindergarten? I was speaking to a large crowd a couple of years ago, and the lady from Romania, good friend, her name is Virginia Prodan, came to the front afterwards and said, Ceausescu did identically the same thing in Romania. This is classical political philosophy. You must destroy the concept of God.
Yeah.
Because government must become your God. So anyway, after 3 weeks, I left Cuba, never to return again, but so happy to be in the land of the free and the humble. I am so proud to be in America. This is the greatest country on the face of the earth, and how dare our president say that this is not an exceptional country. Do you realize that America is the only country in the world born on the Word of God?
Yeah.
No other country. Born by men and women seeking the freedom to worship Almighty God.
Yes.
And even those highly committed men and women of God that landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts, their first year there, they decided, we got all this land before us. Let us all work the land together. And we will share equally in what the land produces. Sounds very romantic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, that communist experiment was a total failure. And it's easy to understand that, because maybe while the strong ones could plow 2 acres of land, maybe the weak ones could only plow a quarter of an acre. How long do you think it took for that guy who plowed 2 acres to say, I ain't doing any more than that guy over there? So nobody worked. They almost starved. But they were smart enough and flexible enough that they came before Governor Bradford and they said, Governor, this didn't work. And Governor Bradford said, all right, each of you take your own plot of land, you work the land, you feed the family. And the free enterprise system was born in America that first year. Now the question is this: if we tried it 400 years ago and it didn't work, why would we be dumb enough to try it again? That doesn't make any sense. Well, anyway, I was so happy to be back in the United States. I worked full time while I went to school. Graduated in 3.5 years. 6 years later, I had my own business in oil and gas exploration. And then in the late 70s, I was shocked again when the peanut farmer from Arkansas was president of the United
He went
States.
from Arkansas.
Georgia, from Arkansas, Georgia. Let me not impute that to you. We have no problems without that. The peanut farmer from Georgia.
Yeah.
Became president, and I began to see policies that reminded me of that bearded dictator I had left behind in Cuba. Some of you may remember the Carter years. 22% interest rates, double-digit inflation, double-digit unemployment, gasoline rationing. There were lines around the block to get gasoline. A government so weak in foreign policy that Iran had become so emboldened that they captured 52 Americans and held them hostage for 444 days. You know, it is not coincidental that those hostages were released the day President Reagan was in power. Let me tell you what kind of a man Reagan was. Do you remember who Reagan appointed to welcome the hostages home? Jimmy Carter. That's poetic justice. Well, anyway, as a result of what I saw in Jimmy Carter, I became very involved on the state board of the Religious Roundtable. The Religious Roundtable was a Judeo-Christian organization that worked together with a sister organization called Moral Majority, Jerry Falwell's organization. And we mobilized millions of Christians across America to help elect whom I consider the greatest president since Abraham Lincoln, President Ronald Reagan. Well, anyway, I'll tell you something. We did it in 1980. In 1980, we didn't have internet. We didn't have email. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have bloggers. We didn't even have conservative radio. I'll tell you something. We did it in 1980. We can do it again. Now, let me tell you the good news, and let me tell you the bad news. The good news is there are more of us than there are of them. The bad news is that too many of us have been sitting in our rear end. And we need to get off and do something.
Yes.
So it is a time for action. By the way, that's just a little advertisement. A Time for Action is the name of my book that will come out January 5th. Following my son's book, A Time for Truth, I have a book coming out January 5th called A Time for Action. Glenn Beck did the foreword, and Ted wrote the last chapter. We're calling an epilogue, showing his vision for America. So, anyway, I'll tell you, it took Ronald Reagan to get rid of Jimmy Carter. It will take again a true constitutional conservative to get rid of what we have today. Anyway, 1980, my son had just turned 9 years old at the end of 1979. So all through 1980, for a whole year, our conversation around the dinner table was about why we had to get rid of this progressive socialist Jimmy Carter and replace him with a constitutional conservative like Ronald Reagan. So my son Ted got a dose of conservative politics every day for a year from a Christian worldview when he was 9 years old. Just a year after he had surrendered his life to Christ as his Lord and his Savior. And then when he turned 13, something happened that really charted the rest of his life. We introduced him to a man by the name of Roland Story. Roland Story was the president of an organization called the Free Enterprise Institute. So now my son is just turning 13, and he's reading Adam Smith, and John Locke, and von Mises, and Hayek, and Bastiat, and Montesquieu, and Milton Friedman, and the Federalist Papers, and the Anti-Federalist Papers. And then this organization creates a group of 5 kids. Ted was one of the 5. They called them the Constitutional Corroborators. What a name, eh? Then they hired a memory expert and taught these 5 kids to memorize the entire U.S. Constitution. For the next 4 years, those 5 kids would travel around the state of Texas. They would come to a luncheon meeting, like a Rotary Club or a Kiwanis Club, something like that. They would put 5 easels in front of the room, and while people were having lunch, those 5 kids would write the Constitution by memory on those easels. And after lunch, they would give a half-hour patriotic speech on free market economics and the Constitution. During the next 4 years, my son Ted gave approximately 80 speeches on free market economics and the Constitution. Before my son Ted left high school, he was passionate about the Constitution. He was passionate about the Declaration, about free markets, about limited government, about the rule of law. And that passion became like fire in his bones. And let me tell you the reason I know that my son will not compromise his principles in Washington is that that fire is as alive today as it was over 30 years ago. Anyway, as Ted became immersed in the Constitution, so did I. I'll tell you, I love this country so much.
Man.
And I love the great, wonderful history of this country that has been erased from our history books. As a matter of fact, I want to share a little bit of history that for some of you may be totally new. You know, there are those that say that the American Revolution started in the 70s. That's not true. The American Revolution started in the 1730s with men like Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield
Yes.
and many other preachers that were the heart of the First Great Awakening.
Yes.
And the First Great Awakening was the spark that lit up the framers. As a matter of fact, the American Revolution and the First Great Awakening are so intertwined that they are one and the same. And what occurred in the 1700s is the same thing I predict is about to happen in America.
Yeah.
We are going to see a two-of revival, spiritual and a political revival, all tied up into one.
Right.
I'll tell you, you look at the Declaration of Independence. In the Declaration of Independence, I count 27 grievances against King George. Did you know that each and every one of those grievances were preached from the pulpits of America for 10 years before Jefferson wrote the Declaration? It was preachers from the pulpits calling out King George for the atrocities that the British were perpetrating against the Americans.
That's right.
Now the question that begs an answer is, where are those preachers today?
Amen.
The majority of them are hiding behind their pulpits, scared to death of losing their tax exemption, scared to death of not being politically correct. Well, it's about time they become biblically correct instead of politically correct. As a matter of fact, let me ask you a trivia question. Do you know where Paul Revere was going? When he went on that famous ride, the British are coming, the British are coming. He was going somewhere. He was going to the home of a pastor by the name of Jonas Clark.
That's right.
At the home of Jonas Clark, there were two patriots hiding, John Hancock and Samuel Adams. The two most wanted men by the British Army. They had orders to take them back to England to hang them for sedition. Of course, you know what was the first battle for our independence. The Battle of Lexington, right? But did you know that the Battle of Lexington was fought right outside Pastor Jonas Clark's church? And that Pastor Jonas Clark and 150 men from his congregation were an integral part of the militia?
That's right.
At the Battle of Lexington, 8 colonists died. 7 of them were members of Pastor Jonas Clark's church. By the way, something else you may not know. Paul Revere was not riding alone. There was a black patriot riding with him, which had been erased from our history books. You know, we've been killed by political correctness. But anyway, the second battle for our independence, Battle of Concord, fought right outside the church at Concord. Again, by the pastor and the men from the congregation. As were many other battles. Now, in fact, let me tell you about one of them. Pastor John Peter Muhlenberg, Woodstock, Virginia. Pastor Peter Muhlenberg was one of many pastors that the British greatly feared. They called them the Black Robe Regiment because these pastors all wore long black robes. Pastor Peter Muhlenberg is preaching one Sunday on Ecclesiastes chapter 3. He concludes his message with verse 8 that says, there's a time for war and a time for peace. And Pastor Muhlenberg says, this is a time for war. He unbuttons his black robe, and as he opens it up, It uncovers his colonel's uniform in the Continental Army. He turns to his congregation and he says, how many of you men will follow me to go fight for our independence? 300 men left that Sunday with Peter Muhlenberg to go fight for our independence. You see, that is the truth that has been erased from our history.
Yes.
You know, you hear all these preachers giving you this garbage about separation of church and state. As a matter of fact, when the politicians like to talk about the framers, there's only two they like to talk about. The liberal progressive. They like to talk about two. The ones they call the ungodly framers. You know who they are, don't you? Jefferson and Franklin, right? Let me tell you about these two men.
Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson, when he was vice president, in his third year as vice president, of course, as vice president, he was the president of the Senate. He signed an authorization, hear me well, to start conducting church services in the rotunda of the Capitol.
That's right. Amen.
Thomas Jefferson attended those services every Sunday as vice president, and for the 8 years he was president, he rode his horse from the White House to the Capitol every Sunday.
Right.
And those services lasted for 65 years. Every Sunday with as many as 2,000 people in attendance. Does that sound like separation of church and state? Let me tell you about the other so-called ungodly framer, Benjamin Franklin. Constitutional Convention had been going on for about 4 weeks, and it was falling apart because all the delegates were at each other's necks. Now that doesn't happen today, that's it. You all get along together, there's no discord among you. Anyway, they were at each other's neck, and it was none other than Benjamin Franklin that addresses the president of the convention, George Washington. And he said, sir, how is it that we have not once called upon the Father of lights to illuminate our understanding? Or do we believe that we no longer need his assistance?
Yeah.
Sir, I have lived a long time. And the longer I live, the more assured I am of this truth, that God governs the affairs of men. That's not the statement of the deist.
Amen.
But he continues, if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can be built without his aid? As the Holy Scriptures tell us, unless the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Then he said, if we proceed to do this without him, we will fare no better than the builders of Babel. He concluded by saying, I beseech you therefore, that from now and henceforth, before we proceed with our deliberations, we meet every morning in this very chambers for prayer, seeking his wisdom and direction. They left the convention that day and gathered at the church of Pastor Witherspoon, one of the signers of the Declaration. They spent 3 days there in prayer and fasting. Came back in a totally different spirit. 7 weeks later, they gave us the greatest document that has ever been written in history outside of the Constitution of the United States of America. Outside of the Bible, which is the Constitution. I'll tell you, the Constitution is a very, very unique document. You got to realize this, for millennia, the model for government has always been the same. This is a man-made model. And the man-made model has always been authority flows from God to the government to the people. And kings and tyrants have used that model to justify their oppression of the people. Their reasoning goes like this: I have the right to oppress you because my authority comes from God. But when those framers were on their knees, and the reason I'm convinced that the Constitution and the Declaration have lasted over 2 centuries because those documents were forged on the knees of the framers.
Amen.
And those framers were seeking revelation from God. And revelation is what they got. And God gave them a totally different model for government. No longer authority flows from God to the government to the people, but rather authority flows from God to the people to the government. From God to the people to the government. You see, we need to realize that all authority under the Constitution is upon we the people.
Amen.
It is not coincidental that the first 3 words in the Constitution are what? We the people. That's where all authority resides. And with that authority comes an awesome responsibility for us to elect righteous leaders.
Amen.
In the book of Proverbs, you'll find the scripture that says, Proverbs chapter 29, verse 2, it says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. When the wicked beareth rule, people mourn.
Yeah.
When the righteous, those who abide by the Judeo-Christian principles upon which this country was built, the foundation of our Constitution. When those are in authority, we have prosperity, we have jobs, we have peace, people rejoice. But when the wicked are in authority, those who trample upon the principles that have made America great, we have unemployment, we got chaos, we got crime, we got dependency, people mourn. But I'll tell you what, if the righteous are not voting, if the righteous are not running for office, what's left? The wicked electing the wicked. And it becomes our fault.
That's right.
It becomes our fault. You know, I have heard so many preachers give me this platitude. And it is this: politics cannot legislate morality. That is a lie.
Yeah.
Politics legislates morality all the time. But if the wicked are in authority, they are going to legislate their wicked brand of morality.
That's right. That's right.
That's what is happening in America today. We have a government in America, we have a president that tramples on the Constitution on a daily basis, tramples on separation of powers, tramples on the rule of law, that governs by executive fiat, by executive order, no different than that bearded dictator I left in Cuba.
Yeah.
Now, what are we going to do about it? Let me tell you something, complaining never solves anything.
No.
And every time you say you do it, guess what? There are 3 fingers pointing at you. I'll tell you something. I lost my freedom once. I'm not willing to lose it again. I'll die fighting for it. America is worth saving. But it's going to take each and every one of us. I'll tell you something. The battle is not November of 2016. That's too late.
It's too late.
The battle is the primary.
That's right.
The battle is the primary. Because let me tell you something. The political establishment would like nothing more than what they have been pushing for the last 40 years.
That's right.
The Republican establishment for the last 40 years have been saying, unless we have a middle-of-the-road moderate, we cannot win.
That's right.
Look at history. Every time we've had a middle of the road, mushy, moderate, we've lost. We lost with Dole. We lost with Gerald Ford. We lost with George H.W. in 92 because in 88, he actually ran as the third term of Ronald Reagan. You remember Read My Lips? Well, we read his lips and he lied. And he got ousted in 92. We lost with McCain. We lost with Ron. If we have another middle of the road, mushy, moderate, that stands for nothing as a Republican nominee, Hillary Clinton will be our next president and this country will be destroyed. This country cannot afford 4 years, much less 8, of the same failed socialist policies of the Obama administration. We need a fundamental return to the foundations that made America great. You know, some of you may remember 1980, when we were in the trenches trying to elect Ronald Reagan. The RNC hated Ronald Reagan. The RNC said Ronald Reagan is unelectable. He's a right-wing zealot. Well, I'll tell you what. Ronald Reagan not just won, he won by an overwhelming majority. As a matter of fact, I have to tell you this. I was last week in Minnesota, and I mentioned there that, you know, in that great sweep by Ronald Reagan, the whole map was red, except for one little speck. And I didn't even mention it. And they wanted to crawl under the table because it was Minnesota was the little speck. We didn't just win. Ronald Reagan won by landslide twice. That's what we need again. You see, nothing that the Republican establishment would like more than for us, constitutional conservatives, people of faith, grassroots, Tea Party, to get at each other's necks. Because if we split the vote, it opens up a wedge for one of these stand-for-nothing moderates to get the nomination. And that would be a travesty. So, I'm asking you, I'm begging you to coalesce. Coalesce around the most constitutional conservative candidate that we can have, and one that has all the resources to win. And I am convinced that person is Senator Ted Cruz. Not just because he's my son, although I am biased. I better be. But I'll tell you what. My son Ted Cruz has been at the forefront of everybody. Whether it is fighting for the First Amendment rights of freedom of speech or freedom of religion, he's been fighting for freedom of religion for decades and winning over and over again at the Supreme Court. Whether it is fighting to defund Planned Parenthood, my son has stood alone to not only fight to defund it, but to prosecute those criminals. Whether it is fighting to keep our rights to keep and bear arms, my son has been at the forefront of fighting for the Second Amendment again for decades. He took a coalition of states to fight in the Heller case and give us a win. Back when Newtown occurred, Republicans were a minority in the Senate. After Newtown, Obama was pushing for gun control. The Republican leadership in the Senate was saying, gun control is inevitable. We can't do anything about it. My son, Senator Ted Cruz, in the Judiciary Committee, single-handedly against Dianne Feinstein, who was the one that was pushing all the gun control legislation. He laid out the constitutional case so strongly that Dianne Feinstein began screaming, "I'm not a sixth grader." And nothing, absolutely nothing passed on gun control. So whether we're fighting for our Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights or our Ninth and Tenth Amendment rights to keep the hands of the federal government from anything that is not in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, because all those powers are restricted to the states. I'll tell you, there is one man that has been at the forefront of each and every battle, and that's Senator Ted Cruz. But let's look at it from another standpoint. Let's look at it from the standpoint of viability. Do you know who was the candidate who raised the most money in the first quarter that we have reported, June 30th? It wasn't Jeb Bush, it was Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz raised $14.3 million as of June 30th. Second was Jeb Bush with $11 million. But let me give you the difference. Those $14.3 million that Ted Cruz raised came from over 175,000 donations. Average donation, $81. Jeb Bush's $11 million, average donation was over $900. That translates to about 11,000 donations. So 12,000 donations versus 175,000 donations. You drill down in those numbers. Over 95% of Ted's donations were $100 or less. In the case of Jeb Bush, less than 3% was $200 or less. We got lots of grassroots, he's got none. Now, as of now, the candidate who has the most money in the bank, hard money, outside of the Democrats and Jeb Bush, is Ted Cruz. With $13.5 million cash in the bank as of today. Not only that, he's got now 6,000 that are called sustainers that are covering 100% of the overhead of the campaign. Overhead of the campaign is covered month to month by those 6,000 sustainers. If you look at super PACs, the only super PAC that has raised more money than Ted Cruz is Jeb Bush. They've raised over $100 million. Second is Ted Cruz. As of June 30th, is $38 million. There has been no reporting since then. But let me tell you some huge news. David Barton is now running a super PAC with Ted Cruz. Now that's huge news because David Barton is a man of honor, is a man of integrity. Super PACs are normally run by consultants that line their pockets with millions of dollars of commissions they take from the super PAC. David Barton is doing this as a volunteer. And he's bringing a new level of integrity, of Christian integrity, to the super PAC. So I'll tell you what, if we all coalesce, not only that, let me give you one more statement. Ted Cruz already have full organization on the ground, not only in the first 4 states, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada, but in all the states that are on March 1. He's already have full staff on the ground in about 30 states. Nobody else, including Jeb Bush, has that. Let me tell you some news I just got this morning. New Hampshire, which is a heavily libertarian state, one where another candidate should have gotten very good. They had a caucus of conservatives, Tea Parties, libertarians. They won by over 72%. If we lock arms shoulder to shoulder and coalesce around Ted Cruz, Ted Cruz will be the next president of the United States of America. And on day one On day one, President Ted Cruz, with one executive order, will rescind every unconstitutional, illegal executive order in Obama. On day one, he will order the Justice Department to launch a full investigation and prosecute Planned Parenthood. On day one, he will tear to shreds this treasonous Iran deal which guarantees war. On day one, he will commence to make the steps necessary to change the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, where it should be. And then he will proceed to dismantle the IRS and set up a low-flat tax for everybody. And get rid of the thousands upon regulations that are strangling small businesses and causing the unemployment that is chronic in America. If we get taxes and regulations out of the way, the American entrepreneur spirit will create millions upon millions of jobs in the private sector. So I'm asking, let us coalesce about a constitutional conservative who loves this country and knows the value of liberty and will take us back to making America again that shining city on a hill. We have a lot of endorsement sheets around here. We would love to pass them out, and I encourage each and every one of you to fill out. If you want to pass them out, meanwhile, what I want to do is do some question and answer. If you have any kind of question, I'll be happy to answer. Anybody? Yes.
This might be uncomfortable, but was Ted able to get back the $500,000 that got shipped over to Fiorina?
I'm sorry? Ted has no control of what a super PAC does.
I know. Was he able to get...
How can he do it? He has no control of a super PAC. Let me say this. The way the election laws are in America, Ted cannot have conversations with the super PAC. He has to stay at arm's length. Super PACs are controlled independent of the campaign. As a matter of fact, by law, Ted cannot know what they're doing or even what ads they do and so on and so forth. It was as much news to me as it was to you that super PAC donated $500,000 to Fiorina.
Well, we were sure that Ted didn't know. I mean, but
No.
the thing is, can he get that?
No, because it's not his money. The money belongs to the super PAC. The money belongs to the people who put that money in the super PAC. So, Ted has no control over that. Yes, back
What's
there.
Ted's position on the Federal Reserve?
The Federal Reserve needs to be curtailed because the Federal Reserve, what they are doing is they are instituting policies that are just artificially keeping interest rates at zero, are destroying the future of people that are retired and are, counting on their interest payments to live, and those people are really hurting. Many hundreds of thousands of retired people that are hurting. Ted, along with Rand Paul, co-sponsor a bill to audit the Fed and get the Fed out into the public.
Okay, this is the last question right here.
All right.
My concern is national security, like what's happening over in Syria, with Russia and China. And I haven't heard, and I remember Ted talk too much about the security over there, that ISIS and that sort of thing.
Well, if you haven't heard, you haven't been listening, because he's spoken very much about it. Number one, he has said, and he actually did it in committee when he was questioning these puppet generals that Obama has. He was questioning one of those puppet generals, and he said, what do you have to do to destroy ISIS in 90 days? And this general said, impossible, we cannot destroy ISIS in 90 days. So Ted says, all right, tell me how long will it take for you to destroy ISIS? And he said, oh, it is impossible to destroy them. All we can do is contain them or manage them. And Ted said, that is totally unacceptable. Ted has said, we need to destroy ISIS. And we do that by overwhelming air power, not pinpoint bombing, but overwhelming air power, and with verbal bomb, arming the Kurds, who are the most effective fighting force against ISIS. And the Obama administration does not allow weapons to go to the Kurds. They send them to Iraq, and Iraq's army is so badly managed, just like we sent 2,200 Humvees there, and a week later, ISIS had 2,200 Humvees. So he's also called for absolutely stopping the Iran deal, because the Iran deal does the opposite of what Obama and John Kerry said. They said it's either the deal or war. It is absolutely the opposite. That deal guarantees war, because it guarantees that Iran will get the bomb. It also guarantees that Iran will continue building ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, that are only needed for one thing: to bomb America. You don't need an ICBM to bomb Israel.
That's right.
And Iran wants to destroy the little Satan, which is Israel, and the great Satan, which is America. It is crazy to be negotiating with our enemies and even allowing them to inspect themselves. That's absurd. That's insane. Thank you. God bless you. God bless you.